With our presentation today, what is reality? A conversation with Philip K. Dick. This is based off of my third semester project, which was a close analysis of the 3 stigmata of Palmer Eldridge, which we will talk a little bit about today. Here it is in the cat edition. You can see there's Phil with his cat. So a younger Phil Dick in the 60s who wrote that. We're going to be discussing some pretty serious music today. Concepts are going to be pretty far out there for 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to try to maybe layer in some humor in order to soften the mood. And also, Tim and I were talking about this earlier, I'm going to try and not make any dick puns, but Matt is just giving me one of those looks. So already we're too late. It's you sure you don't want to learn about dick, Matt?
Close the door now.
just shut it.
Philip K. Dick fans are also often known as dickheads, by the way. So you all get to be impromptu dickheads today. Okay? Hopefully there's some actual dickheads out there. I know there's one up front. So. All right, let's begin. Today's presentation is brought to you by Hugo. You know, we think about belief as a product and as something that maybe could exist everywhere. It could exist in the chairs that you're sitting in. It could exist in the back of the room. It might even be available in a convenient aerosol spray. Ubik. It's non-allergenic, so don't worry. We're going to do a quick demonstration here. We've got our incomplete fill, but with an application of Ubik, I think you're going to see a reality change. So please watch closely, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, there it is. Welcome. Round of applause for Phil, please. Yeah. Who was able to join us today. There he is. Of course, Phil is not here in person. However, we have all these artifacts that he left behind, and they're pretty cool. It's like he was able to take who he was as a thinking entity and translate it into these various books that we get today. So they turned out to be kind of a mixture of philosophy and fiction, which is why they're some of my favorite books, and I'm going to make a lot of recommendations today. If you have any questions about any Philip K. Dick book, I know most of them, but I'm not one of these people who's read every single thing that Philip K. Dick has ever written. I've met them at the International Philip K. Dick Festival. It was in Edinburgh. There's some really cool people I could put you in contact with if you are interested in becoming a PKD scholar, as it were. I'm going to take a page out of Jim Kelly's book today, because we're going to talk about Philip K. Dick, the science fiction prophet, and we're also going to talk about Phil, this kind of weird guy from California who writes science fiction or something. This wasn't meant to be symbolic. It's just a T-chart, but you can find symbolism wherever you want. So let's first talk about Phil, the author, and then we'll talk about Phil, the person. We've also come to the wonderful prize portion of our presentation today. As an author, Phil wrote many, many, many short stories. Does anybody here have a guess as to how many short stories he had published? The winner will receive the early science fiction of Philip K. Dick as a prize. So, big raised hand if you have a guess. How many short stories did Philip K. Dick publish? And I've got to go with someone who I don't know, a first year. Laura, how many short stories did Phil publish?
I want to say it was upwards of 150.
150-ish is correct. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. He had 150-ish short stories published both in his lifetime, and he'll continue publishing his work posthumously as they find it, because he's got stories just squirreled away everywhere, and they're at the UC campus at Riverside, I believe. Oh no, Fullerton. At Fullerton there is a Philip K. Dick archive where you can go and they will let you look through reams and reams and reams of his writing, because he would type all night and just had stacks and stacks of stuff. Correspondences with authors, correspondences with publishers. A lot of it has been compiled into this book, for those of you who aren't familiar. This is the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick. It was published in 2012, and it was originally over 1 million words long. So it's been condensed to something that's not fairly manageably edible, but hopefully we'll have some time to look at this later today. Our next prize, we have 3 prizes today. There's going to be a lot of 3s, by the way, so just be prepared for that. Our next prize is for the number of adaptations that have been turned into, number of Philip stories that have been turned into either movies or into some kind of a short series of TV episodes or something. The winner of this one will receive Paycheck, which is probably one of the worst adaptations of one of his stories by John Woo. If you have a guess, how many short stories or things have been turned into Philip K. Dick plays? I'm gonna go with the first again in the back. What's the guess? How many of his works have been turned into movies or plays? 7 is not correct in this reality, but give him a round of applause anyway. That was pretty close. There's probably some reality where only 7 of those works have been turned into plays. Currently, Marcus, what's your answer?
Too little, too late. Yep.
No, I want to
go ahead.
I want to know.
12.
12 is correct, ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa.
Your backup prize is Blade Runner.
Oh!
The best of them.
Yeah, depending in America, again, there's going to be a lot of issues today, so just roll with it. There are about 12-ish adaptations, the most famous of which is Blade Runner, probably. He didn't have anything to do with Blade Runner 2049, by the way. That is non-canon. We don't talk about it. I won't talk about it today. Don't ask me about it. However, some works like A Scanner Darkly, I think, are almost perfect adaptations of his work, even though I kind of have, mixed feelings about that one, depending on how you watch it, what kind of substances you're on. There's a gentleman named Terence Sawyers in the UK who is doing his PhD on all of Philip K. Dick's various adaptations around the world, and he says that there are over 150 different short works by students and by small filmmakers in Europe. So he will be continuing as an adaptation still. Last prize today is going to be for the number of novels Phil published in his lifetime. So you will win your very own copy of Ubik. Does anyone have a guess how many novels have been published by Philip K. Dick? How many novels did he write?
Posthumously,
I'll just guess.
We'll go, posthumously. Do we have a guess in the back?
25.
25. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Again, not correct in this reality. There probably is some kind of a world where he only published 25, but currently he has 44-ish novels published. Yeah. It is important to note, in 1964, he wrote, I don't know if this is some kind of a record, and it's probably held by Moorcock anyways, but he wrote 7 novels in 1 year. And the last of those 7 novels was The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, which did not leave a lot of time for editing, which makes the book even more fascinating to me, because that means he planned it, and he probably just wrote it, and it was sent out. And then he refused to read it after he wrote it because it terrified him. So we're going to have a lot of fun analyzing it in a little while. Other than his short stories, adaptations, and novels, he does have about 30, and counting, 30 or more scholarly works written about him, whether it's analyzing his work. He's also got about 12-ish biographies written on him. I had this great one that I ended up giving away because, believe it or not, I give away a lot of books. It's called The Divine Madness of Philip K. Dick. And if you really want to be a PKD person, that is my #1 recommendation. It's by a gentleman named Kyle Arnold, who is a therapist in addition to a writer, and he's kind of known for doing this therapy analysis of authors who have already died by looking at their works and looking at their life. So if you really want to kind of understand what was going on in Phil's brain, I highly recommend The Divine Madness. Okay, one last thing we'll mention here, Philip K. Dick, science fiction prophet, the author. Yes, he won like a whole bunch of different awards. He won the Joseph W. Campbell Award for Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, which hopefully, it got lost along the way, unfortunately. is you're going to have a little bit of entropy. That's just normal. We can use the Ubik and maybe bring it back, but maybe it'll work. He also, of course, won very famously the Hugo in 1962 for The Man in the High Castle, which again got turned into a Netflix adaptation that I don't want to talk about. I won't talk about that. Any other questions about Philip K. Dick, the author, before we start talking about Phil? Does anybody have anything maybe to add or note or questions? Yeah.
I recently started watching Man in the High Castle without having read the story.
Mm-hmm.
What is so terrible about the show adaptation from the book?
You know, a lot of people who are big fans of the book will say that the show is not true to the source material in a lot of ways. They took the concept, which is what if Japan and Nazi Germany won World War II, and then they kind of went their own direction with it. So they took his concept, but they didn't take anything else. And like a lot of those works, a lot of the philosophy doesn't get adapted very well at all, because the philosophy isn't interesting. And we watch movies because they move. And we read stories because we think about them and they affect us differently. And quite honestly, I only watched like the first episode, and I was out of it. So,
I'm on like the 3rd episode of the 1st season, so.
Yeah. I would say if you're enjoying it, keep watching it, and then afterwards, highly recommend taking a look at the book and hanging out with Mr. Tagomi. I love that story.
The biggest departure I think they made as far as purpose of making it into a story was the fact that in the book there was really no resistance. They had just sort of given up, and
Yeah.
you can't have that as a narrative device really in a narrative television show, you know, where there's no resistance against the status quo at all.
Yeah, it just doesn't make for compelling, narrative, unfortunately, even though it's really fascinating to read about. Okay, let's talk about Phil the person. I'm gonna go over another 4 or 5 things here. After this, hopefully we'll have some time to talk about the big question, which is what is reality? Another important question that Phil liked to ask was what is human? So we're gonna take a look at the dynamic between those two, and then hopefully either go into the exegesis or the 3 stigmata a little bit. So this is like Herbie. H.G. Wells was known as Herbie. Phil was he's kind of this really, really weird guy. There's one really important thing about him that I'm just going to leave blank because we're going to come back to it. But let's talk about the other things Phil is kind of known for. Most importantly, we've got, I'm going to write drug use, but then I'm going to put a mark here and I'm going to write abuse.
Yeah.
Because he was known for being a pretty heavy drug user. His drug of choice was amphetamines. Here's the story behind that. He was born in 1928, died in 1982, and in the 30s when he was a child, it was, for whatever reason, pretty common to prescribe amphetamines for, various, the kid's not doing very well, we'll give him amphetamines, maybe that'll fix it. And, amphetamines were really prevalent during that time with Nazi Germany and various other things too, and it wasn't until much later it was discovered how destructive they were. But he was given, I think, in the Divine Madness, it says around 8 or 9 years old, he was started to be giving amphetamines for his allergies and for his anxiety. And he continued to use and abuse them for most of his life. He did finally get clean in about 1971 or 2, and he was able to stay off of them. So when we think about his stories, we do need to think about, okay, how does this affect the story? Was he using the drug as a kind of medium to accelerate his writing? And that answer is, of course, yes. He wrote 7 novels in a year. You've got to be on something to do that. Or you're Stephen King, who was also, he liked to.
Yeah, he liked it.
So, I think about this, and Phil is pretty honest about it as well. He says somewhere else in the exegesis, talking about his own drug use, towards the end of his life, he knew he was dying. And he knew a lot he died pretty young, he was 54. And he admitted, he said, the cost line is finally higher than the yield line when it came to drugs. So he really thought about it from kind of a mathematical perspective. You'll see a lot of his characters are also involved with drugs somehow, which I think is fascinating because the book itself is kind of like a drug.